Hello everyone, welcome to Reflections, a program sponsored by the Paducah Cooperative Ministry. We are a cooperative effort of area congregations that gather together resources and individuals to respond to basic human needs and conditions in McCracken County. And we've been at it since 1973. My name is Heidi Suhrheinrich. I am your host for today's program, as well as the Executive Director of PCM. And I'm very happy today to welcome our two guests, two experts in the area of homelessness that work with us down at PCM on a daily basis. We have Candace Melloy, who is the PCM Homeless and Housing Case Manager. Welcome, Candace.
Thank you.
And we have Sheila Forrest, who is the PCM Shelter Director. And you two work with the very complex human issues of homelessness every single day. And we, in a previous program, talked about homelessness in a broad general sense. And now what we want to do with today's program is really zero in on what is PCM's specific response to homelessness. What are we doing down there to respond to each homeless person that crosses our path? Let's begin, Candace, with you. Tell us a little bit of your understanding of the PCM spirit or philosophy in our approach to homelessness. How would you describe that?
Well, first off, PCM's motto overall as an agency is doing God's work with human hands.
Right.
So that's what we do. We basically just work one-on-one with clients, and our goal, our biggest goal, is to help everybody get from our shelter, from a homeless situation, to safe, affordable housing, helping them along the way to become self-sufficient and to be stable for the future.
Okay. So would you say that most homeless shelters approach the issue of homelessness in the same way?
No, really there's two different types of shelters.
Okay, two different types.
Yeah. There's the one type, which is basically just, here's a bed to stay in, here's a nice warm shower, here's a meal, and then tomorrow, you know, is a new day and you start over with the same things. And then there's also shelters that are more service oriented, that okay, great, we've got your basic needs met of a place to stay and a warm shower and food, but let's now move past that onto some other concerns and issues and barriers that you may have. Both shelters are very needed. Sometimes somebody comes in and all they want and need is a place to sleep. Other times they come to a shelter hoping to move from where they are now to somewhere better. Our shelter, Paducah Cooperative Ministry Shelter, is the second type, the one that's more service oriented. We do initially give them what they need as far as, you know, a place to sleep and everything, but then we work past that to figure out what concerns they have, what caused them to be homeless, and what they need to do in order to prevent this from the future or happening in the future.
Okay, okay. So people are at different stages in their lives, right? So some people just simply can't think beyond, right now I just need somewhere to sleep tonight.
Correct.
And I don't want to think about anything else.
Right.
And then you've got other folks that say, I am really tired of this and I'm ready to do whatever it takes not to be in this situation again. So I can see why there would be two different types of shelters. So the Paducah Cooperative Ministry Shelter is really a comprehensive services shelter with the goal of breaking that cycle of homelessness.
Yes.
Okay. Sheila, describe the shelter for somebody who has no idea, only what they've seen maybe on television of what homelessness looks like, and what does our shelter look like to somebody who's never seen it?
We leased 5 buildings, 5 large apartments from Paducah Housing Authority. So first of all, no one would know they were shelters if they drove right past them, because they're right in with the neighborhood and they don't have signs on them or anything like that. Each house has a kitchen, bathrooms, laundry room, living room, and individual bedrooms. So it's not what you usually think of as a bunch of cots lined up for people to sleep on.
Like a barracks or
right.
something.
It's not a big building with nothing but cots in it. There's even television. There's no cable, but there's a television. The families that come to our shelter are responsible for their own meals, for their laundry, for the day-to-day upkeep of their bedrooms, and everybody shares in the cleaning chores of the common areas of the house. But they're left to be as self-sufficient as possible in the shelter, with myself and my weekend manager as the people that see them daily to maybe help with some of the things that they may not know how to do. We do get people that come into our shelter that don't know how to do laundry, you know, or to thaw out meat safely. That's one
cooking
of my
skills maybe a little bit.
Yeah, cooking. There may not be
wobbly.
any cooking skills. A lot of them only cook in microwaves because they've never used a stove before. So there is a day-to-day teaching of general life skills, just simple life skills. So there's that, and then like I said, we have the bathrooms, the shower, the laundry room, so they're able to do their own laundry. We supply laundry detergent to them. The basic needs are met each day they're at the shelter for the residents.
Okay. I know one common question that I get is, you know, how long can a person stay in a shelter? How does that work? How is that determined?
They get 30 days when they first come in, and then after that they can continue staying as long as they're following the rules and are applying for housing and are doing things to help themselves to get out of their homeless situation. It used to be that, I guess, the longest someone could stay with us was 90 days. And generally within that 90 days, they would have found a job, they would have applied for housing and gotten some kind of housing, or decided to leave town and go somewhere else. But that stay is getting longer because housing is harder to come by. People, you're finding that people aren't moving as much as they used to, so subsidized housing, being able to get into those has slowed down a whole lot. Even Section 8 is not, which is the HUD subsidy, is not taking applications right now. So that's slowed things down a whole lot. So people are having to stay with us longer than they used to. We still get those that come through, and like you said, they really only want a place to stay for a little while until they decide to move on to the next phase, and they're not ready to get a place of their own, because everyone does not want a place to live. In our minds, we think everybody should want their own place, you know, their own mailbox, literally, but they don't. Some people just want a place to sleep. They don't want the responsibility of maintaining a home, because there is responsibility that comes with that, and everybody doesn't want that.
Right.
So in the course of a day-to-day time dealing with the residents and talking to them, I kind of get to find out the ones that's their goal. They don't want more than that. So we may give them the 30 days and then help them to find another shelter that they can stay in, or they may just decide themselves to leave. But those that are there to try to get a place of their own, then I work with them daily to help them to do the things to get into a place of their own.
Okay, all right. So Candace, speak to the issue of how long does it take these days to get into housing, and also if you would also speak to subsidized housing. What does that mean exactly? What is the process to obtain housing that you work with?
Okay. First, something to know about our community. There's basically two different types of housing. Okay. There's private landlords, which is what the general public knows as, you know, just a private landlord, maybe a single unit or an apartment complex. Okay. It's a flat rate rent, and you know, and you pay according to the size of room or size of apartment, house or trailer. And then there's also subsidized, which means it's based on your income. Okay. All of, or most of them are HUD subsidies. And they actually they take your income and figure out what 30% would be, and that
30%,
and that basically is what you can afford. Okay. Those are honestly the ones that we push a lot in our shelter, because the average person who comes in, they don't have an income that can sustain them in a private landlord. I see. Or their jobs are unstable. You know, if you're working at a fast food restaurant and it's Christmas, then you're going to probably be getting more hours. But then come summer,
when everybody goes on a diet in January.
Exactly. Or in the summer, when a lot more high school students are needing jobs and that kind of stuff, jobs start to, then you lose some hours. The good thing about
income gets cut.
Yeah, the good thing about subsidized housing is if your income gets cut, then your rent does too. Or if you end up losing your job altogether, that doesn't mean that you're going to lose housing. It means that your rent will be adjusted, at least for a time being.
So it's kind of a safety net.
It is, yeah.
So. That makes sense.
Yeah, unfortunately, not everybody has a stable job that, you know, they know they're going to be at for many, many years, and makes enough to actually do that. So, and then going back to what takes so long, when somebody applies for housing, subsidized housing, each housing agency has a different criteria of what's needed. Most or all require a picture ID and a social security card. Okay. For children that are under 21, they have to have birth certificates, or even you know, if you're a single person and you're under 21, you have to have a birth certificate. Some of them require background checks, police reports.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, you don't think that those take very long, but they do.
So they don't necessarily come into shelter with all of that documentation ready to go.
Right.
Because if they've been bouncing from place to place, couch to couch, sometimes you're just carrying the bare minimum with you and things get left behind.
Right.
Birth certificates, I would think, is a real common one. Is that right?
It is, yeah. I mean, it is not uncommon at all for someone to come into my office, and as I'm, you know, doing their initial intake and assessment, they don't have their children's birth certificates. And I know, because I've worked with them long enough, that, well, you got to have that for housing.
Yeah.
So that same day I go, all right, well, let's see what we need to do to get those birth certificates. Depending on the state and depending on how many people are applying, it can take up to 6 or 8 weeks to get a birth certificate.
Oh my goodness, 6 or 8 weeks. Well, they just wait for a birth certificate.
Right.
They can't be applying for housing in the meantime, is that right?
No.
Nothing happens for 6 to 8 weeks until those birth certificates arrive.
No.
Okay. So that's 2 months sometimes.
Exactly.
Okay, wow.
And then for police reports, some of the housing agencies actually do a police report that only takes 24 to 48 hours, but some also do FBI background checks. Those, on the form that you do, it actually states that they can take up to 18 weeks.
18 weeks.
Yeah, that's not
goodness.
common.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, but it still is.
So
probably,
it can get bogged down.
It can.
And sometimes they
process.
come back after 6 weeks and they need something else from them, so they have to start over again.
Or if the fingerprints weren't very good, then they're smudged, then they'll send that back. So that just costs more time.
That can cause a lot of frustration.
So with a person who, say, needs birth certificates and police reports, from day one, if we know that and we send them off that day,
Right.
you're still looking at probably close to 3 months before they can even put in their first housing application.
Okay, once they get that housing application in, does that mean, you know, a couple weeks they'll have that apartment to set,
No.
you know,
They
what
have
happens then?
They have a process where first they're actually approved, which means that their application is processed, the background check is processed.
Everything came back okay.
Right. They've had landlord references and all of those came back fine. If that happens and they're approved, then they're put on a waiting list.
Okay, the waiting list.
The waiting list in some of the agencies is short, you know, well, what I consider short.
What do you consider short?
2 months.
2 months.
Yeah.
All right, I forget. I've lost count of how many months were.
And then some of the other places, like Sheila said, Section 8 is closed right now.
Closed, so they're
if-
not taking any applications
Right.
at all. They say we have this program is only existing for the ones that are in housing right now.
Right.
Nobody else can come in.
Yeah, and obviously they're closed because they need more time to process applications and get people
Okay.
moved off of the waiting lists so that they have room for others. So some of the other agencies, it takes 3, 4, 5, sometimes even more months to get to go from approval to actually getting assigned an apartment. And then even that doesn't mean that you're going to be moving out the next day. We had a lady just last week, or this week actually, that moved out. She has been assigned an apartment for what? Probably a month and a half?
About a week, about 2 weeks.
Okay, yeah, about 2 weeks. So, and some of them, they're assigned an apartment that's not quite vacant yet, or it's vacant but it hadn't been cleaned, and if they have to paint and repair damages and everything, so even that can take a little while.
Wow. So a person could be in the shelter for 6 to 8 months with that, you know, that's fairly common anymore as compared to the 90 days that you spoke of, which is 3 months. I remember those days. You and I pretty well understood that 90 days was about as long as it took, and if a person hadn't achieved self-sufficiency in 90 days, they weren't really interested. But times have certainly changed.
Yes, and part of what I do now, because it does take so much longer, is I spend a lot of time going, you've got to be patient, you've got to be patient. You know, don't give up, you've got to be patient, helping them figure out things that they can do to keep their minds motivated, keep them staying still, keep them from giving up and just throwing up their hands and going to another community where they'll get there and discover that it's the same thing all over again. And as long as it takes for here in some of the bigger cities, it takes longer to get anything subsidized.
Yeah, it's not uncommon for someone to come to us from a bigger city and say, well, I was on the waiting list there for housing for 2 years. And they're not exaggerating. They're you know, that is really how long it's taking some of the places. So with that being said, we do feel fortunate that it's not that long.
Certainly.
But our folks kind of get antsy, and who wants to stay in a shelter for 8 or 9 months?
Right. So what do we do in the meantime? How do we make that time bearable? Are there some activities, some things that go on to help strengthen that family so that when the apartment finally does come through, they're as ready as we can imagine helping them be?
Well,
Sheila, what do we do to help folks?
I have a stand-up routine that I tend to
You
do
have a stand-up
daily
routine.
for the residents to keep their spirits up, and
Right.
humor
You gotta
does
have morale matters.
Humor
doesn't
does play a large part in helping people to stay stable and to keep them content and keep the kids happy. We have several programs through PCM, financial literacy program. There's a life skills that has once a month that sometimes our residents go to those. We encourage them to continue their education, to be looking for employment. If the children are in school, I encourage them to get involved with the school system and what their kids are doing in school. Definitely looking for employment. Even those that draw disability, I encourage them to go to a program called vocational rehab out of the employment office, who work strictly with people that are disabled, to help them find part-time employment that they can do around their disability, that won't lose their disability money, and it's a good program. So we do try to find as many things as we can that are positive to help the residents to stay stable, and I just encourage them, especially if they come here from another state, to learn the area. I tell them all the time, Paducah's a big place. Learn the area, get lost so you can find your way back. So that way you can, you learn the area that way.
Yeah.
So it makes a difference.
Yeah, and it's also important for them to learn more about the agencies that are in Paducah, because after they leave our shelter, although they're no longer homeless, generally they still have needs that they don't always have the means to meet. So learning more about the other agencies in the area, what to do if you are on your last $10 of food stamps and you still got 15 days left in the month, those type things. So Sheila actually gives all of the residents bus passes, and they can use
the city bus system.
Yeah, so they can use those to actually go around town, and get some of the things they need.
Okay, so what is provided is we provide food assistance. They cook their own meals, but we provide the food to cook with. Cooking lessons, per Sheila, laundry supplies and household supplies, bus passes to help them get around town. Okay.
Generally, when a person first comes into the shelter, they're going to see Candace first, and she's got 1,000 questions that she has to ask them, which has evolved from when I first started working, which was about this much of questions and comments, and they signed their name.
I think it was all on one page.
Yeah,
anyway.
Oh, it was. It was on one page, and part of that was the rules, and then it was the person's information. But it's had to evolve because in the time that I've been there, one of the first things I discovered was we didn't have an emergency contact for people if they became ill or they just disappeared and left their belongings. So we needed somebody to call. So we encouraged them to give us an emergency contact person so that we can call someone if they end up in the hospital or whatever. And then knowing more about their background, we started asking more questions, and then our new grant we got, it required even more questions. So, Candace has to warn them up front that I'm getting ready to ask you about your whole life, and maybe,
and let me bring you some refreshments while we do that.
Yes. And after she does her part with them and they come to me, then I'm going to show them around the shelter. I'm going to have them, I'm going to show them their bedrooms. I'm going to give them the general rules of the house that may not be on the intake paper that they signed. Give them a bus schedule, tell them about how to catch the bus, the day-to-day rules of the shelter, and then it starts from there. So.
Okay. So Sheila, you're pretty much a coach, an educator.
I will push, pull, prod.
A firefighter?
Yes. I push, pull, prod, whatever I need to do. Sometimes I'm just a shoulder, for them to cry on if they're upset. And I will even tell them, when they're stressed or worried about the fact that things aren't going as well as they should or as fast as they should. Generally, I tell them, okay, it's okay to have a pity party, but you need to time it. You get 20, 30 minutes for your pity party.
Now, go.
And then you get that pity party, and then you get back up.
Yeah.
You have to keep moving. Nothing will get done for you from the living room. It used to be when I first started working that we didn't require people to do really anything. So they could come in and they just kind of be there watching TV and eating. And it was like, you know, nothing gets done from the living room. Watching TV serves no purpose. So when they come in and they'll say, well, why don't you have cable? And I say, because we don't want you to be that comfortable. We want you to feel a little discomfort being here. I don't want you to think this is just home. It's a comfortable place. It's a safe place. But this is not your home. You want your own place. Don't you want to have a place where I don't come ask you every day why you didn't make your bed? You know, I know you'll miss me, but it should be a good miss.
Right.
So, you know, we want them to stay as self-sufficient, and they have to keep moving.
Right. We do want to avoid encouraging dependency, and that's easy to happen.
You know, one of our rules is they have to be out between 9 and 4, Monday through Friday. And every now and then somebody in the community may call and say, well, I don't understand why you make those people get out between 9 and 4. And I'll tell them, well, it's for their sake. I said, you know, we're not a permanent shelter. We're a temporary shelter. In the cities, they have to take every belonging with them and leave and hope they can get back in at 5 o'clock. We don't say you can't come back. We're saying get out there, apply for work, apply for food stamps, apply for housing, learn the area, and that way when you come back in this evening, you'll be tired, you'll fix your meal, you'll watch a little TV, and you'll go to bed, you know, and get up tomorrow and do the same thing. When the weather's really bad, we don't make them be out. You know, they get to stay in. But during the rest of the time, yes, they have to be out and gone. They can't get anything done from the living room.
I agree. I think that's a very wise decision. It's healthier that way. Let's talk about some of the special needs that we see. Do folk, you know, we've kind of touched a little bit on substance abuse and even mental health issues, but you know, what do you see, Candace, in terms of special needs that our residents may have? Are there a lot of folks with disabilities, illnesses? Do folks go to the hospital on a regular basis? You know, is there health care available? Can you talk a little bit about that?
On average, 70% of our adult population has some form of special need.
70%, that's huge.
Yeah, and what we consider a special need at Paducah Cooperative Ministry is domestic violence, mental illness, any kind of physical disabilities, or substance abuse issues, or HIV or AIDS.
Learning disabilities, that sort of thing?
Yes, learning disabilities as well. So now, not all of those that have a disability or special need of some kind are actually to the point where they can't function on their own. Not 70% of them receive, or not 70% receive disability income or anything like that.
So, but it does mean that there's some small complication that may slow them down a little bit or require a little more staff help to get through that because of that particular special need.
Yeah, and so Sheila spoke a little bit to this, but during the actual intake process, which is what I do a lot of, I actually ask them questions about that. And that's so whenever Sheila gets them, then she knows, okay, well, here are some things that, you know, we can help them with too. I go ahead and try to start helping them with referrals and talking to them about places like vocational rehabilitation, like Sheila was talking about, or I help them, you know, if they say they have some kind of mental illness that's not being treated or addressed, then I say, hey, well, we have a counselor who comes here once a week. She comes from Four Rivers Behavioral Health and meets with clients on Wednesdays. Would you be interested in talking to her? We think it's important for everybody at least once to go see her because, you know, you can always benefit from talking to somebody.
Because you're in a crisis and it's a very stressful place to be. Right, exactly.
And then also another thing, it's not a special need, but as we discussed last segment, we have a lot of young mothers now. You know, 18 to 21 is rapidly becoming our highest age demographic. So a lot of times they don't know how to parent. We have a program called Wings, which works with parents who have children under school age.
Right.
And that's also once a week.
It's a strong program. We worried so much about those children and whether they'd be ready for kindergarten or not, and this helps the parents prepare them, doesn't it?
Well, especially if they're a first-time mother, you know, they don't know what.
That's what 2-year-olds do.
Exactly.
They're right on target.
Yeah,
or they're not, so let's get some help in there for them.
Wings came about because of the families that were coming through during the time when I first started. We had one family in particular that had a 4-year-old who wasn't talking, her teeth were rotten, and she'd never seen a doctor. And we started talking with the Head Start program about something that we could do to start working with those families to make sure the kids were on point.
There's so much more we'd like to talk about, but I want to ask real quickly, Candace, what happens when somebody calls you and says, I have nowhere to stay, and we don't have space for them in our shelter? Do we just say, sorry, call us again sometime? If what happens?
Well, first off, a lot of people think that that doesn't occur. A lot of people have the misconception that there's not homeless in our area. Last year in 2012, we actually denied shelter to 791 individuals.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And that's all due to not having space.
To space. Oh my goodness. Where do these people go?
I have a book. It's not as thick as you would think, but it's of the area shelters. It has Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, and Indiana.
Okay.
So I work with them on, well, do you have family or friends anywhere in one of these states? Or, even here. And then sometimes I spend time with them actually calling places, finding another appropriate bed for them.
So trying to get them a bed somewhere.
Right.
And how do we get them there?
Sometimes we help with a Greyhound bus ticket, depending on how far it is.
Okay.
And sometimes we help with a gas voucher if they have a vehicle or they have somebody that can take them. And sometimes we provide transportation ourselves if it's to a shelter that's in the area.
Okay.
We try to leave every single person with at least one other option.
An option. That's wonderful, because we don't want anybody on the sidewalk, unless it's of their own choosing, but
Right.
And rarely is that the case. Well, we're about to wrap up here. I just want to touch briefly on some of the ways that people can help, and some of the ways that the churches are involved. And I think that we would say that PCM is the conduit for folks to assist, or churches to assist, and we connect one another. Would you agree? Churches have come in and done cookouts, they've done vacation Bible schools, they've done Christmas parties, Easter parties, they've invited them to Wednesday night dinners, and we have also referred folks out to congregations of their choice and tried to work transportation. So there's a lot of things that we can do to help get people connected beyond the PCM walls. That's really, really important, because support systems sometimes make all the difference in the world. We are out of time, and I'm so sad about that, because there's so much more that we could talk about. But you guys do marvelous work, and I know that it's work of the heart, and it's a work of faith, and it's a calling, and we are blessed to have you at PCM. And I like to brag on you a little bit, and it's a privilege to work with you both. And so thank you for being with us today and for sharing your knowledge and experience. And we sure thank all of you for tuning in, and we pray that you be well, and that you be at peace, and that you come back and see us again. Thank you. Mission.